Let me just, before we start the video, let me just ask you a couple of questions and share a couple of things with you that hopefully will stimulate your mind to even get more out of this presentation. So do you realize, I think everybody knows this, that when we first put living things, their first dogs, but then men, in space, and they came back from being up in orbit, that we discovered early on that their bones were weak after being in space for a while. And that's why you may know that the space station, orbiting space station, it actually has it's like a wheel, and it's rotating so that the rotational speed produces centrifugal force so that when you're walking, it's like walking in gravity, okay? And if they didn't do that, the problem would be when people came out of a weightless state back to gravity, they would actually be in danger of breaking their bones. So what does that tell you? What it tells us is that our bones are constantly in flux. They are being, like the pavement, like the highway out here, they're taking up the old macadam or the old pavement and putting down new pavement. And that's happening to our bones constantly right now. And so when we're exercising, when we're working in gravity, that's very good for our bones. But it can be a problem because the bones are made mostly out of calcium, right? And so the calcium in our bones is constantly being cycled. What that means is that it's going into our bloodstream and back out into the bones. And so it's easy if we do something that causes our body to leach or to excrete an excessive amount of calcium, it will weaken our bones because the cells that are doing this will not have enough calcium to keep the bones strong. So with that in mind, I'm going to now let the doctors here on this video give us more information, and then we'll have a little bit more discussion.
When we think about bone health or osteoporosis and food, the first thing most people think about is calcium. When we talk about calcium, the first thing most people think about is milk and dairy foods. So it's easy to make the simple jump from needing calcium to prevent osteoporosis to needing dairy foods to prevent osteoporosis. But the evidence is that bone health involves so much more than just calcium. It is a complicated area with many contributing factors coming from both our diets and our lifestyles. Most people consider a diet without dairy unhealthy. Without dairy foods, how could we obtain sufficient calcium for our bones? Yet osteoporosis and associated hip fractures are more frequent in populations in which dairy products are commonly consumed and calcium intakes are commonly high. For example, American women drink 30 to 32 times as much cow's milk as the New Guineans, yet suffer 47 times as many broken hips. Data does not support the hypothesis that the consumption of milk protects against hip or forearm fractures. In fact, those who drink 3 or more servings of milk a day had a slightly higher rate of fractures than women who drank little or no milk. A 12-year prospective nurses' health study found participants who consume 2 or more servings of milk a day were at increased risk of hip and forearm fracture. This does not mean that dairy causes osteoporosis. However, it does suggest that dairy products are not protecting us from osteoporosis, as we have been made to believe since our childhood. On the contrary, studies show fruits and vegetables are protective against osteoporosis. A study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition had elderly participants fill out a food frequency questionnaire to assess diet and supplement intake and measure bone density at 3 hip sites and 1 forearm site. Results supported the hypothesis that fruit and vegetable intake was protective to bone mineral density. The evidence shows that while calcium is important for bone health, milk and dairy products are not needed to ensure healthy bones. In fact, many of the world's population cannot even tolerate cow's milk. Milk naturally contains a sugar called lactose, which is broken down with the help of an enzyme called lactase, which is a natural production of the body. For many people, once they pass 2 to 5 years of age, the body stops producing lactase, and they are no longer able to digest this sugar effectively, which can lead to abdominal pain, bloating, and gas. It has been estimated that 30 million people in North America are lactose intolerant, with rates of lactose intolerance varying widely across the world. A wide range of plant foods contain calcium and can contribute it through a varied diet. But what may be surprising to learn is that plant foods also provide a range of key nutrients for bone health that animal foods do not. Let's look at the plant sources of calcium, including the values in 100 calories of foods. Look at the greens at the top, especially pak choi, and collard greens and kale, broccoli, sesame seeds, and soya beans. They are all great sources. It has been shown that when those who follow a plant-based diet are no greater risk of bone fractures to those who consume animal products. Inactivity and food dietary choices determine bone health and risk of fracture. If you are concerned about your bones, talk with your doctor regarding bone density tests to help determine your bone health. Vitamin D is also very important for bone health. It plays a key role in the absorption of calcium in the small intestine, as well as facilitating skeletal materialization and stimulating bone absorption. Vitamin D is a unique nutrient in that while foods contain small amounts of this vitamin, we get most of it from exposing skin to sunlight. Vitamin D deficiency appears to be a growing problem even among groups not traditionally thought of as high risk, as our lives take place more indoors. It is difficult to put a general value on how much sun exposure is required to meet an average person's vitamin D needs, as a number of factors, including age, ethnicity, geographical location, can affect this significantly. Living in colder climates where we cover up more and having a darker skin tone can also lead to less vitamin D production. However, regular safe sun exposure can be the vital part of maintaining adequate vitamin D levels. Sun exposure is needed for vitamin D, but we still need to be safe due to the risk of skin cancer. Avoid prolonged unprotected exposure to the sun at peak UV times. Check with your local physician or Cancer Council for peak UV times in your area. Foods, fortified with vitamin D are available and can be useful in parts of the world and times of the year when sufficient sun exposure is not possible. Though whenever possible, we should use the need for vitamin D as a further reason to get outside. Kill two birds with a stone and get your daily vitamin D by taking a walk in the sun. In fact, weight-bearing exercise, such as walking, has also been associated with improved bone health. As we age, like me, our body's ability to synthesize vitamin D decreases. And this is just one example of how needs and exposure times differ from person to person. Another nutrient which is important for bone health is vitamin K, which is found abundantly in green leafy vegetables such as kale, spinach, salad greens, cabbage, and broccoli. The Nurses' Health Study showed middle-aged women consuming the most vitamin K had the lowest rate of hip fracture. Framingham showed that men and women in the upper end of the scale for vitamin K intake had a 65% decreased risk of hip fracture compared to those in the lower end of the scale. Other minerals such as potassium and magnesium, found in a wide range of whole plant foods, are also integral to maintaining good bone health and further support the advice that our diets should be rich in fruits and vegetables. So often we look at foods as nutrients when really we need to focus on the whole package. It is true that dairy foods are rich sources of calcium, but they can also contain detrimental nutrients. Cheeses, for instance, are extremely calorie-dense due to their high fat content, most of which is harmful saturated fat. Is it worth trying to build up our bones with foods that can clog our arteries where other options are available? When we look at foods as a whole package, it is whole plant foods that provide us the great benefits, while also containing the least negatives. Another key component to bone health is physical activity, and more specifically, weight-bearing activity. In order to have strong bones and prevent osteoporosis, we need not only to have adequate calcium intake, we need to also preserve the calcium we have. This is where activity, especially weight-bearing, becomes really important. You might think that as you get older, that weights or resistance exercise should be avoided. But nothing could be further from the truth. This is when it is most needed. I do believe you can build strong bones on a plant-based diet.
We are experiencing an inactivity crisis in our society. So how can we be...
I'm going to pause him for just a minute before we change to talk about exercise, because I want to review a couple of things. Let me turn on my microphone. That were brought out there. So did you catch the fact that when they have studied dairy intake around the world, that what they found was instead of having a lower fracture rate in the countries that have the most milk intake, they actually found a higher fracture rates. And so with all due respect to the dairy business, which has every right to market its product, the fact is they cannot make the claim that the milk builds strong bones. They did used to say that, but now if you actually, instead they just have the little white mustache and say that milk does a body good. It doesn't actually, and that's really a motto, that's not a claim, so we cannot. But my point is that you enjoy dairy if that's what you want to do. It's not an optimal food after the weaning age. That's been shown pretty well. And it is actually harmful for our bones. It's actually, turns out as she talked in a previous one about protein, that excess protein in the body tends to leach calcium, take more calcium out of the body. Okay, how about this one? What was the best source of calcium? If you wanted to, can you see in your mind's eye that little chart there? They had and milk. They had the milk over on the right-hand side, remember, and the amount of calcium there. But there were some foods on that chart that were lower than milk. Okay, which I'll scroll back to that chart. If I do that, I'll get myself in trouble. Yeah, bok choy was the highest, although they have a wonderful way of pronouncing the English down there. Of course, they say when I'm down there, they say you have a weird way of pronouncing the English. But anyway, I can't pronounce that the way she did. But yeah, the bok choy was at the top, and it was like over twice as much as the next thing. So, but maybe you don't like bok choy, that's okay. There were in the vegetable family, there were something like 5 things shown there, bok choy being the highest, that were higher than milk. And so that is the best source of calcium. And I'll tell you something else that's really interesting. They have done studies and shown that a cup of cooked broccoli or greens, collards, you will absorb more calcium from that than from a cup of milk. It turns out that absorption rates are actually better in cooked greens than it is in milk. So, now they didn't cover this, at least I didn't catch it, but do you know what is the typical age at which in the first world a woman's bone density is at its highest? Do you know where you reach your peak? It's somewhere in the mid-30s. Mid to late 30s is usually where in America, first world, Europe, we have the highest bone density. However, in the many women, it is not really optimal at that age, even though it's the high point. And there are studies coming out and being done looking at how much difference there is in vegetarians compared to non-vegetarians and the peak bone density. Okay, there's one last thing I need to say about it for you before we look at the exercise. And that is, there's a book that if you are menopausal, or if you're a man that's menopausal, although it's a different hormone, but nonetheless, men do have a type of menopause. And once you reach that point, as you know, I believe you all know, your bone density starts to go down faster. So if you are facing osteoporosis or osteopenia is the form before it becomes dangerous, but it's getting low, your calcium in your bones, and you want to do something about it, you should get a book called What Your Doctor May Not Tell You About Menopause. What Your Doctor May Not Tell You About Menopause by Dr. John Lee. John Lee has gone to his rest. He's deceased, but the book is still in print, and it's still a very helpful book if you're fighting osteoporosis or osteopenia. What Your Doctor May Not Tell You About Menopause. Okay, so let's listen now to one of my favorite speakers, Dr. Darren Morton, as he talks to us about the practical aspects of exercise.
Well, it simply involves to sit less, break up our periods of prolonged sitting. The O is to oxygenate. That is, engage in activities that cause our hearts to beat a little faster and our breathing to increase. The final S is about engaging in strengthening and stretching exercises. Let's take a look. For many people, when they hear the word strength building exercises, also known as resistance exercises, it conjures images of young males with big egos in the gyms grunting abnormally loudly, eager to impress the fairer sex. But the truth is that that is wrong on two accounts. For one, to do effective strength building exercises, you don't need to join a gym. In fact, you can be your own gym. And I'm about to demonstrate to you a range of activities that you can do in the convenience of your own home. The second thing is that it's not just young males that can benefit from resistance exercises. In fact, if I were asked who could most benefit, I would reply the opposite demographic. It's probably older females that stand to gain the most. And the reason for that is there's three distinct things that are achieved through resistance exercises, like the ones I'm about to demonstrate. And the first one is that resistance exercises increase our muscle strength and increase our muscle tone. You see, as we grow older, we tend to experience sarcopenia, which is a loss of muscle mass. And when we lose muscle mass, we lose functionality, we lose strength, and there's a whole range of other problems that are associated with that. For example, stability. We're more prone to falling if that's the case. And so one thing is by doing resistance exercises, you can help preserve your lean muscle tissue, which is a real positive. The second thing, and this is fundamentally important, is that when you do strength exercises, not only do you improve the muscle strength, you also improve the strength of all the other things that support muscles, and that includes bones. And we know that one of the best ways to improve your bone density, which tends to decrease after the third decade of life, sadly, is to do resistance type activities like the ones I'm about to share with you. And then the third thing, and you're going to be interested in this, so listen up. We know that resistance exercises, by improving your muscle tone, can actually boost your metabolism. Now, if you know and are envious of those people who can eat copious amounts of food and are still as skinny as a beanpole, whereas we know there are other people who just walk past a cake shop and the smell goes straight to their thighs, we know that often the reason for that is because of your metabolic rate, your resting speed at which you burn energy. What we know is that resistance exercises are very effective for dialing up your metabolism. So, if you are interested in A, keeping up your muscular strength and functionality, B, improving your bone strength, and C, dialing up your energy expenditure even whilst you're sleeping, then resistance exercises are for you. So, let's get stuck into it. Let me show you a simple routine that you can do in the convenience of your own home. Now, before you do resistance exercises, it's always a good idea to do a bit of a warm-up. And that may just involve 5 or 10 minutes of brisk walking or jogging, if you're up to that. So that's one important consideration. The second thing is that as we demonstrate these exercises, and I'd encourage you to follow along, if at any time you experience any pain or discomfort, then obviously cease from doing that. And check with your health professional before you proceed. Now, for most of the activities that we're about to demonstrate, you actually need no equipment at all. But for some of them, it's worth having just some light resistance weights that you can use. And you don't need to go out and purchase something in order to achieve that. For example, well, if you do have some of these lying around the house, that's great. Or you could get some of these from a local sports store. But things like tins of food serve just as well. You can get various sizes, obviously. Here's another idea, is taking a couple of drink bottles, and you can fill these up with water or with sand to varying extents so that you can adjust how much resistance you like to use. Now, I've invited my friend Heather here. Welcome, Heather. Thank you to help me demonstrate these range of activities. And these are the heaviest items I have, so you're going to take them and I'll take the tins of food. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start at the top and we're going to work our way down. And essentially, these activities work most regions of the body. So you can get pretty much a complete body workout doing these. And as you'll see, it's just in the comfort of your own home and you don't need expensive gear. Our first exercise works our shoulder muscles, which are known as the deltoids. And the starting position is as such. And all we do is we extend the arms and then back down to the starting position. And you can keep doing that for a moment. What you'll find is that this is a very functional exercise, that mimics the action of taking things down from a high cupboard, which particularly as we get older can become a bit of a challenge. So these sorts of exercises can make a huge difference in this regard in increasing our functionality. That's the first shoulder exercise. The second one we'll come down to a position here. We need to make sure we're not going to bang into anything, but starting with our hands beside our side and keeping the arms almost straight, just bring them out to the side and then back down again. Nice. Now, people often say, how many times should I do this? Should I keep going till the cows come home? Well, in truth, what you probably need to be aiming for is around about 15, what we call repetitions. And every time Heather lifts that up and places it down, that's 1 repetition. There's 2, obviously. If you can select a weight that you can perform about 15 repetitions with, that's probably about ideal. If you get to the end of the 15 and it's like you haven't even lifted anything, then obviously you need to increase the resistance a little more. If it's too much of a struggle and your eyes only pop out of their sockets, then that's too much. And so 15 is probably an ideal target. Okay, there's our shoulder exercises done. The next muscle group we're going to work are the front of the arms, referred to as the biceps, and this is called a bicep curl. So our starting position is here, and we lift the weight and then back down again. Now, as Heather's doing that, I'll just explain it's a really important thing when you're doing resistance type activities is to adopt a good posture. And the most important part, one of the most important parts of this, is what happens in this midsection region. Now, you may have heard of the concept of core stability, and what that means is making sure this area is nice, that the tummy's tucked in and nice and tight, because by doing that, we support our lower back. And so that's the bicep curl, and you can see keeping that nice tight core is really important. Okay, for our next activity, we won't actually need the weights. We're actually going to be using a wall, and this activity will target our chest muscles, the pectoralis muscles, and the back of the arms, which are the triceps. Let's move over to the wall, Heather. So Heather, if you can just stand with your hands about shoulder height, that's correct. Nice straight body, and the technique is just to lower yourself towards the wall and then push back out. And this is exercising the muscles on the back of the arm, the triceps, and also the chest muscles. Now, what you want to make sure is that as you're doing this, you're keeping a nice straight body line. You don't want your bottom sticking out with a bent back as such. And also, you don't want to arch your head and shoulders forward. Nice straight torso is the way to go. Once again, thinking about keeping that core nice and strong. Now, for a more challenging variant of that particular activity, we can find a nice stable bench as such. Take a good couple of steps away from the bench and lower yourself down and then back up again. And you can see this is beginning to resemble those push-ups that we love from our childhood days, which are actually a more challenging variant again. So that's our chest and our tricep muscles exercised. The next activity does the opposite, the upper back muscles and the biceps. And we need to come over the stairwell to do that. Okay, so for our next exercise, we're going to make use of this post, or you could use a railing around about the height of the midsection. And as Heather's got your toes nice and close to the base, and all we're going to do is lower ourselves down to a comfortable distance. Don't go too far beyond your capability, and then pull yourself back into position. And as you can see, this is working the muscles of the upper back and also the biceps. This is called an upright rowing exercise. Now, a variant of that is to use a chair, and I want you to Heather, put your knee and this hand on the chair as well before we take a weight in the other hand. And it's very important that you put this hand in place so that it supports the lower back. The exercise, as Heather's demonstrating, is just to pull the weight up to your armpit, and it's working these muscles in here. Very nice. Okay, I'll take the weight from you because we're now ready to do some lower body exercises. We're going to start using the chair again and put it in place as such. Very important for this that you have a very stable surface, so you can use a chair or a bench, something that's not going to give way on you. Now the exercise is to simply squat down. And it's important as you do this that you actually stick your bottom out. And if you look down, your knees they only act as a hinge joint. They shouldn't be collapsing in or out. And so you should be able to look down and actually see your toes at all times. Your knees shouldn't pass beyond your toes. That's why it's important to stick your bottom out there. Now, as you get better at that, perhaps a slightly more challenging variant is to actually come around to the front. And this time I'm going to stabilise myself by putting my arms out into the front and just lowering down to a seated position and then back up as such. And what you can see is that This is a very functional activity because it involves me going into a seated position and then back up, which is a strategy or a technique that many people as they get older have a lot of difficulty with. So it's a great activity to practice in that regard. Okay, for our next set of activities, we need to move to the floor. And so now we've worked the muscles in our upper legs, it's time to target our midsection region. And we're going to do the front side, which are the abdominal muscles or the tummy muscles. And to do this, as Heather's adopted, we want a nice bend in the knee. And all I'm going to get you to do, Heather, is just to place your hands on your thighs and just slide them up towards your knees. And you can see, for this exercise, all you need to do is lift your shoulders off the ground. You don't need to come up any further than that. And as we do it, we concentrate on tensing our tummy muscles. Now, one thing that's very important while you're doing this exercise, as with all resistance exercises, is that you need to make sure that you're breathing throughout the activity. It's in and out constantly. When you hold your breath, particularly that sort of grunting type sound that we call the Valsalva manoeuvre, it can dangerously elevate your blood pressure. So it's important that you keep on breathing. Well done, Heather. We've worked the front of our midsection, our tummy muscles. This is an exercise for the lower back region, and all you need to do is to extend your arms out in front, lifting your opposite arm and opposite leg simultaneously. And according to our 15 repetition policy, if we could perform 15 repetitions on each side, that would be perfect. Once you completed that, you could roll back over to the front, do your abdominal exercises, roll back, and then once you've done that 3 times each, you've completed 3 sets of 15 repetitions, which is the ideal. Okay, you can have a rest. We're on to our last exercise. We need to come over the steps to do that. And for this last exercise, Heather, I'll get you just to step up a couple of steps. Very simple. All you need to do is place your toes on the edge of the step. Make sure that you're supporting yourself on the rail so that you're nice and steady. And then just lowering yourself down so that your heels go down and then back up onto your tippy toes. And this is called the calf raise. And obviously it targets the calf muscles. And what I find fascinating about this exercise in particular is that you're only using your body weight, and yet after 10 or 15 repetitions, you'll feel that burning sensation in your muscles. Don't be alarmed by that. Obviously, you don't want to push it too far, but that's a normal symptom of doing resistance exercises, and it should subside very soon after you stop. And so what we've been able to demonstrate for you is that it doesn't need to be difficult, and you can do it by just using simple equipment around the home, or for that matter, just your own body weight. You can perform a very effective resistance training program. If you were to do this 2 or 3 times a week, you will notice very significant changes in your strength and your level of vitality. Give it a go.
So we have a little bit of time. If you had some questions that you'd like to ask, I'll see if Paula can answer them for us. I'm teasing Paula. So, so we talked about exercise. Let's touch on that first. So what do you think about those? Is that something that you could do at home? Yeah. It's actually quite simple, isn't it? And I thought it was good that starting from the very first one, just that you works our shoulders, right? Arms. And then he showed us how we could work our muscles on the stairs, lying down and doing the little pull-up to work the central. Just about covered everything, didn't it? It's pretty close. So why would we want to do that? What does that got to do with osteoporosis again?
Because it prevents calcium from leaching from the bone.
Yeah, in essence, that's true. What it does is it puts some strain on our bones. One of the things I didn't mention, I'm sorry, I give a lot of talks and I forget who I've told what. But one of the things I think is important to help you understand the connection between the exercise and the osteoporosis is that our bones actually, when we do resistance exercise, they flex a little bit. Not enough that you can tell it. I mean, if it flexes enough, you can tell it, you're in trouble, okay? You got a serious problem, you need to get to a hospital. But they move in a microscopic amount, and when the bone flexes the slightest amount, it actually stimulates the putting down of new bone. So that's why when they're weightless in space, there's no bone flexing, and the bones don't keep strong. Okay, anyone have a question that you'd like to ask before we have the taste samples? Yeah, we're gonna try and get it on the video, so we're gonna, okay, he's got a question up here.
Like, football players, athletes.
Oh, yeah, that's all right, we get it on the video.
Well, a lot of athletes, are at the peak of their condition, and athletes that aren't like in abusive, violent sports, and then football players as well. Everything gets blamed on all the activity they've done their whole life, but they've mostly been specimens of fitness most of their life, and usually at the peak of their fitness, they lose a knee or something like that. Do you have any ideas what's going on there?
Yes, good. It's a very interesting question. So as I understand what you're saying, you're pointing out that professional athletes or people who are trained athletes, and at the peak of their fitness and physical age, they oftentimes have problems. And it's and what would we make out of that? Okay, so there's a couple of things that are very important. As I understand it now, the most significant injury that comes from a career of football or boxing, either one, is traumatic brain injury. It's actually the multiple hits to the cranium, and the effect over time builds up. Any individual blow doesn't necessarily knock the person out, but it does create cumulative harm. Okay. But as far as like the knees and so on, these athletes have much more stress put on their bodies than any of us doing normal stuff would do. And another thing, this has been shown in studies, longevity studies of athletes, is people who've been very, very fit for much of their younger or middle life, and then they retire or get out of the sport or whatever it might be, they actually tend to have a more deterioration of their bones and body than someone who's had a more moderate level of activity their entire life. So I'm not meaning to say that I don't think that it can be healthy to be an athlete or in sports, but I do. The evidence is really clear that we need to avoid traumatic blows to the head, and we need. I mean, let's face it. I used to be an extreme football fan. I mean, I watched that stuff like it was a religion, and. But I'm glad I didn't play, because the things that they do are phenomenal, but the injuries are out of this world. I mean, as you probably know, and I think most of us know, there are many athletes that have had an accident on the field, playing field, that took them out of the sport for good. I mean, it's not repairable. Yeah, so that's a good question. Was there one back there as well?
Yes. Okay. This is probably a little too obvious to ask, or self-explanatory, but I'm still going to ask it. Do people who exercise more live longer than those that don't?
Okay, that's a really good question. Do people who exercise more live longer than people who don't? And the curve, as they call it, is actually a J. It's a U curve. But anyway, so if the amount of exercise is on the x-axis, and on the Y is how long they live, there's a sort of a U-shaped curve. So people who don't get hardly any exercise, that are couch potatoes, it does affect their longevity, Adiel. It's lower. But the curve comes up and then it's pretty flat for a while. There's not a lot of difference between people who get moderate exercise and people who get mildly extreme exercise. But after you get past mildly extreme, it starts to drop off. It's actually harmful for longevity. Now, we don't know all the reasons for that. Because this is an observation of a population, it may turn out that those individuals have a personality trait that affects their longevity, and it also makes them want to be more extreme athletes. I mean, these things haven't been sorted out, but it's actually moderate activity seems to produce the longest longevity, and it needs to be continue after retirement. Moderate activity and that stops when you retire, its benefits go away quickly. Yes, did Barbara have a?
Continuing what you just approached. So as an older person, I didn't necessarily exercise much earlier in my midlife. As I get older, would the benefit be? How great is it?
Great question. Thank you. There's so many things that I forget are good to mention. So the question basically is, what if, let's suppose I didn't exercise very much for the first part of my life, and then I found out about, let's say, the benefits, and I started exercising later on, and will that be useful, or will it be too late? The answer is absolutely it is. There is apparently there is advantage if you've been doing it your whole life. That's the peak. But I'm thinking in particular of a lady who had a mountain in California named after her. And she was a nurse, retired at 65, and at 67, she realized that her health was really poor and she was going downhill, and she started exercising vigorously. She worked her way up until she became, I think she ran some marathons, and anyways, I mean, she became what I would consider an almost extreme athlete, okay, in her 70s. Holder Crooks. And there's a mountain in Southern California. You can see it from Mount Whitney, but so it's there in that same area. And it's Crooks Peak, named after her. And so another example, there's people who have been studied that are quite elderly, in their 90 and thereabouts in their 90s. And they have been having to use these little walker things because their balance and so forth. And then they start exercising on a regular basis, and they do not need the walker anymore. They're stable again, get their balance. And so, absolutely. And I'm going to make a little plug. It's not an advertisement because I don't make these things, but I tell you, one of the best forms of exercise, especially after retirement, is one of these little rebounders, this little trampoline thing, and get the one that has the handlebar on it, and you can exercise and get a lot of benefit in a short time. Well, thank you for these questions. We need to announce the food samples tonight, and we'll turn these folks loose for a bit.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Tom. So tonight, the food sample is a bean and carrot salad. So there's more than just that in the salad. There's some red pepper, some green onion. It's pretty unique. You should give it a try. Little sample. They'll be in the fellowship hall. So just go out, turn left, and go till you can't go any further, turn left again. So we hope you partake of that. And again, I apologize for my voice, but I do want to say a little prayer before we go have our food samples. So dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the health that we do have. We thank you for these presentations that we're hearing, and Dr. Kelly, and just help us to bring to mind the things that we can do every day. Sometimes it's just something small. We just ask your help in that as we continue to live a better life. We ask that you bless the food that's been prepared and safe travels home. We pray all this through your son, Jesus.